Hello, Paul. How are you?
I'm
Okay.
good indeed. Thank you so much. Now we're here to talk about your new album, Liberty, which has just come out. But before that, on Vintage Rock Pod, we like to hear the stories from the past as well. So we're going to dive back to nearly the start, not quite the start, but nearly the start, and speak about Rick Wakeman. You probably get asked about this an awful lot, but obviously Rick is a huge star. He's a rock and roll Hall of Famer with Yes and everything like that. But
Yeah, yeah,
your association with Rick goes back even further than his Yes days. I mean, you played on his album, didn't you? The Six Wives of Henry VIII. But you were actually friends before even all that, weren't you? You met him in a in a music store. Is that correct?
yeah. That's absolutely right. Yes, he was a. There was it used to be a music store in South Ealing called Musical Bargain Centre, and it was run by a guy called Dave Sims. And Dave Sims was a drummer as well, and he had his own little kind of function band. And he said to me one day, well, actually, Rick was in there one day, and I was in just brooching around. It was one of those places where musicians could just go and hang out and have a cup of
Yes.
coffee and chat. So I was introduced to Rick, and he said, "Why don't you come along and see me play with Dave Sims' band?" And they were playing in a kind of, social club type situation, and doing kind of standards of the time, a bit of soul, a bit of pop, and he was obviously pretty good. I thought, wow, he's doing it. And he was also playing with a band at the Top Rank in Reading. When in the days when Top Rank ballrooms had, used to kind of house bands and everything.
Yeah.
And I went along and saw that, and that was much rockier. But he was outstandingly good. But it just so happened to coincide with a period where I had just been signed by this kind of writing collective in London, called Writers Workshop, and it was a kind of embryonic stage where young writers could get together, and some established ones, and they were already on the label, were producing bands like Procol Harum, The Move,
Ah,
and
yeah.
you know and there was a young engineer or producer that had just come over from America that was working as a kind of new young producer called Tony Visconti. And so I was asked to play bass on a project they were doing there with the guy from the Ike and Tina Turner show who had come over
Wow.
to live in a singer called Jimmy Thomas. And they said, we need a keyboard player for this. Do you know anyone? Who knows anyone? And I said, I've just met this guy, should be pretty, I think you'll find he's good, and he came along to the session. We recorded the single, and he was yeah, pretty outstanding, obviously. And Tony Visconti's jaw, I think, kind of metaphorically just dropped. And I remember him saying, "Oh, thanks for bringing Rick along to this one." And of course, next minute, Rick's in the thick of the session world and doing sessions for everyone,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
bless him, he tugged me along on some of those just by association. I got to play on a few things, and as his session work took off, I mean, this was before Strawbs days,
Yes.
before
Yeah.
he was even
Yeah.
Strawbs, So we were kids, really. So yeah, we used to knock about together. He had a car,
Phenomenal
and I did.
stuff. Now it's interesting the whole chat about music stores and music shops and things like that, where all the instruments were. I've spoke to people like John Lodge of the Moody Blues and Kenny Jones from Small Faces who met Steve Marriott at a music shop, and it's the sort of thing that doesn't really happen anymore, is it? I mean, back then people used to gather in these places, and that's where you used to meet like-minded people and musicians, and that's how friendships and bands formed, wasn't it? But that's very much changed now, isn't it?
I guess the whole uh, music scene was a lot smaller then, and
Hmm.
of course, lots of young people coming into it at the time I did, really. So uh, no, you're right. The record stores aren't there anymore, and of course, this was actually a music shop as well as selling records and
Yeah.
things. So there was instruments there and everything. So it was a natural place to gather in those days. There weren't many of them.
Indeed. So, with your association with Rick, is that how he pulled you along and got you involved on his album, The Six Wives?
Well, yes, it was really, yeah, because did quite a lot of sessions with him. A lot along the way as his session work progressed, he was doing bigger and bigger stuff and doing some film stuff. And he had he had obviously been with Strawbs by then,
Yeah.
and through that he had met Dave Lambert, the guitarist that joined Strawbs, and Dave was a local West London boy as well. So we ended up working together on a few sessions, and so I knew Dave Lambert already. And then when Rick had been through Strawbs and joined Yes, and when he came to do Six Wives of Henry VIII, yeah, he kind of spread the load around his favourite pals, I think, in terms of the session musicians that worked with him on it. And it just so happened that one of the tracks that I played on that album involved Dave Lambert from the Strawbs and also Dave Cousins from the Strawbs, because so it was the first time I've met Dave Cousins, even though there's a long story behind all that as well. Because my mother and Dave Cousins' mother used to work in the same office.
Oh wow!
The Household Health Authority, and my mum would come back with tales of, oh, Dave Cousins' Strawbs band is doing well, and all this sort of thing. And my mother would be telling Mrs. Cousins. Anyway, long story short, yeah, we on that session for that track on Rick's album, we all met because we all played on it, and we ended up doing a Old Grey Whistle test afterwards in promoting it. So, and it was shortly after that they asked me would I be interested in, joining Strawbs. So
how did you feel at that point then? Because obviously the Strawbs, when you joined them, they'd really broken through the mainstream, hadn't they? The album had gone to number 2, they had a big single, that sort of thing. So how did it feel? Was it like, yes, breakthrough for you sort of feeling, was it?
I was obviously pleased to have been asked, really. But the strange thing was Rick already had solo plans in his head. Obviously, just done the solo album, and he wanted to put a band together eventually, which he did, of course, in the end, to go out and promote his own solo stuff. So he had asked me already, would I be in that? But when the Strawbs offer came in, he actually said, look, it's going to be some while before my solo stuff goes. He said 100% I would go with with the Strawbs thing, and of course I'm sure behind the scenes he kind of recommended me as well. It was a big change for me. I've obviously worked with bands, local bands and things, and done all this session work, but it was first sort of big band, if you like, that I got involved with. And as you say, they had become big in the national consciousness here at the time. But the idea of at the time I joined with 2 other guys, Rod Coombs, the drummer from Steelers Wheel, and John Hawkin on keyboards, because there was a kind of, Strawbs had the success with part of the union and everything, but it caused frictions in the band, and the idea was to get, and the new lineup would go back to being very much album orientated, and that's what happened, really.
Absolutely. And just talking there about we joining a band as big as that. I mean, you look back, it was the right decision, obviously, to go with the Strawbs rather than hold on for Rick Wakeman, because 50 years on, you're still with the Strawbs, and it's incredible to think of what's happened to you in that stage, in that sort of time.
Absolutely. Obviously, I haven't been with Strawbs non-stop through that period, because there was I really ran the American era, if you like, when we were touring the States and North America an awful lot. And come 1980, after 7 or 8 years of that, Dave Cousins decided he wanted to just step away from live music for a bit, and he got into local radio, in fact, independent local radio for a while. So there was that whole period during the 80s and 90s where I wasn't with Strawbs, and in that time, during the 80s, I worked with Steve Hackett. I was in his band in the early 80s, and of course Rick eventually, in the mid 80s, I worked with him on touring and did another album with him, and did touring with Rick, which was actually the first time I'd played live with Rick, even though we'd done all this, the history of session work. So
fantastic.
So I came back into Strawbs in the early, just after the millennium, really, and have been there since, as you say.
And a quick word for Steve Hackett. We've had him on the show as well. He's an incredible guitarist. And what was he like to play and record with?
An absolute gentleman. Steve, as you say, he's an astounding guitarist. Absolutely nice guy to play with and work with. And that whole band I really enjoyed. That he had Ian Mosley on drums, who went on to Marillion, of course, and Nick Magnus, a bit of a legendary kind of prog keyboard player, and also Steve's brother John on second guitar and flutes and various things. It was really good vibe to play in that band. Really, everyone was a good player, and just turned it on every night, and I just admired the attention to detail Steve Hackett had. I think everything about the production of the show, even in those days in the 80s, the lighting, the sound, he was a stickler for getting it right, and more power to him for that, you know.
Yeah, fantastic. And going back to you joining the Strawbs, then your first album with the band Heroine, it's become a real firm favourite with Strawbs fans. It's an iconic album as well. I mean, what do you remember of your time recording that album? Because obviously it must have been very special with it being the first one with the group with you.
Yeah. Well, when I joined the band, we went down to the West Country where Dave Cousins was living at the time, and we did a lot of early rehearsals down there, and some of the songs for the albums took embryonic shape down there, really. And then we went out and did a couple of tours, one in Europe to knock the band into shape, and then, in America to show A&M the new lineup, A&M Records, who they were signed to at the time. And then we started recording the album later that year in 1973. We went and did a single first, and we recorded that in the UK. And that's probably, yes, that was my first time properly in the studio with Strawbs, we recorded a song called "Shine On Silver Sun." I remember putting all these counter sort of melodic bass lines on it, thinking, "Oh, hope that's right," but it seemed to go okay. But I think it was when we were touring around and we bumped into like Fairport Convention, and Dave Pegg, you know, at the time, he said, "I'd love to do bass lines on that single and everything." And actually, that's the first time I thought, "Oh wow, I've got a good bit of feedback there," you know, because I suddenly felt like I belonged. I guess for a bit, I thought I might have been the young imposter, but you know. But we went to Denmark to make the rest of the album, and that was quite special. It was cold, snowy, and a lot of time we spent in the studio. And well, yes, it kind of went in a bit of a blur, but there's a lot of work went into making that album.
And it turned into a phenomenal success. I mean, the Strawbs as a band, I mean, I heard Dave Cousins once say that there's not many bands that can headline a folk festival one weekend and then a prog festival the weekend after, all while playing the same songs. It's pretty incredible the way the band is appreciated by fans of many genres.
Yes, I think that's true. I know what he means by that, and of course, over the latter years, you know, with Strawbs having had an acoustic lineup that would work as well as the electric, you could go even smaller. You know, as acoustic lineup, you could play a folk club one night, and the electric band could headline a theatre or festival the next night. You know, but you're right. I think it kind of crossed a few boundaries, and although Strawbs called prog and everything like that, it's actually, there's so many sort of roots elements in there of from the folk scene. I mean, I didn't personally come out of the folk scene, but Dave Cousins obviously was very very into it, and so there's always those elements of Strawbs. You can strip a song however big in production it went with mellotrons and goodness knows what. You can always strip it back to the guitars if you like, and play it acoustically in a folk club. You know? So.
Absolutely. We've mentioned Dave Cousins a few times, and obviously he released a statement at the end of last year saying due to ill health, it'll be for the foreseeable future, he won't be touring or anything like that. So just to ask about Dave, how is he at the moment?
Well, he's fine as far as I know. I mean, I haven't now seen him since we did a couple of festivals early autumn last year, and I think it was those festivals. He was on tremendous form on them actually, but he said it took a lot out of him at the time, and he felt at the time that perhaps we shouldn't start playing again until this year. And then in the intervening time, come around November, December, as you say, you know, he had reassessed the situation and thought, you know, I think I'm just going to step back from live work. Although we're in the early stages of talking about a new album, so I mean, he's definitely as sharp as a tack as ever, really. And I'm sure he's writing lyrics furiously, and in that sense, he's very well, really. But I think he just feels the rigors of full-on touring a bit much for him right now. So, for the foreseeable future, as he said, you know.
So you talk about the early stages of a new album. Are you involved in that, or do you kind of wait until Dave comes up with the main bodies of the things?
Well, I mean, we're just talking about it. It doesn't seem that long since
The last one,
Settlement came
yes.
out, the last album. We did that in lockdown as well. So really early stages here, but I think at this stage we'd all be knocking ideas around. Well, we're just about to maybe put some ideas around and see, early feelers out in terms of material and what's there. So it's a bit early to say we're 100% doing, man. But we're certainly talking about it at the moment. Yeah.
And what's it been like working with Dave? Obviously, there was a big period where you went off and did different things, but in terms of him as a person and a musician and a friend, I mean, what has it been like working with Dave for such a long time?
Oh, well, I mean, lyrically, I mean, obviously, he's always your man to go to. He's just astounding with lyrics. I don't know how he does it, but and I think it's in the Strawbs ethos anyway. I think, but I mean, driven by him. The experimental side of things. I mean, even going back to the 70s when we were recording those early albums, the lengths we went to sort of get some sound effects, and in the days when there weren't any, you had to kind of make them yourselves almost. The things we got up to, tape loops, the going back to Ghost album, the peal of bells that go through the track Ghost. Yep. People say, how did you get that sound? Well, that was our producer Tom Allen going out and recording the local church bells or whatever. And we're coming back and we just made the very speeding tapes and everything. We, a bit of a long process to go into, but it's that kind of experimental thing that had a terrific result. So, I'm sure in this way, even though recording techniques have changed since then, we'll still be going for as experimental a kind of approach on some of the aspects of it as possible.
Absolutely.
And see what happens. But Dave's a real catalyst for making things happen. Whether it's organising the Strawbs 50th anniversary concerts weekend in America, which he did just a few years ago, or whatever. He kind of has quite an ability to bring lots of strands together.
Fantastic. And you mentioned Settlement there quickly. It came out to great reviews last year. Fantastic stuff. But then we talk about your new album. It's literally just come out now, Liberty. It's your second solo album, I believe. Is that right?
Well, yes, it's the first proper one, I think. But yeah, I did do some mood music, ambient music album a while. About 20 years ago, in fact.
Yes,
but
it was.
it was kind of more specialist that I think I never really saw the wide light of day. But this would be my first attempt at an album, songwise and everything like that. So yes, there is the ambient music album out there somewhere, but this is the first proper one. Yeah.
And this one was born out of, like so many other musicians who were sat at home during lockdown because they couldn't be out touring. I mean, this was born out of the lockdown thing, wasn't it? And initially, Absolutely. It was just the one song. You created the one song and you'd put it on social media, on the internet, and it got some real traction, didn't it? To the point where Renaissance Records in America actually reached out to you to say, hey, fancy making an EP out of this?
That's exactly what happened. Yeah. Basically, you interested in doing something? They came on and... they suggested an EP, so I had one other new track on the go at the time. Sent that to them; they loved that, and we decided we'd put the EP together with two other songs, which I sort of already had. One was a song called "A Splash of Blue," and that had actually appeared on a Dave Lambert and Chaz Cronk album going back. But I sort of remixed and did some work on that. And another track I had, which had the song had appeared on the Strawbs album with Dave Cousins singing, but I went back to my original recording of it and embellished it, finished it off. So we ended up with 4 tracks for this potential EP, and Renaissance did the artwork for it, which was a bit out there, but I loved it. And it was at that point they said we'd like to make this an LP, and we were still kind of going through the lockdown phases. So I thought, well, I'm going to write all new material to finish this now. I don't want to go back and revisit anything else, and want to keep it in the same vein, get some sort of continuity to the whole album. So So it took some months longer, because I find it a slow process, sort of writing and when you're recording pretty much everything by yourself, you know. And I guess when you're working on your own, the worst bit is that there's no one to bounce off, and it takes longer to make, you know, to be sure you're making the right decision about something or other.
Absolutely.
So,
And that must have been quite exciting for you. I mean, you put together the 4-track, the EP, like Renaissance had asked for, and for them to come back and say, can we make it into a full-length LP? Can we make it a full record? Can we make it a proper album? I mean, that must have been really positive, a great reaffirmation for you.
yeah, it was. It was, although I did think, oh my goodness, you know, another sort of 4-track, 5 tracks, and but as I, you know, again, because of all the lockdowns, I was able to sort of get back in the groove, if you like, and think where it should go from there. And they had done the artwork by then as well, and the whole thing seemed to be taking on some kind of shape and, you know, becoming real. So I wouldn't say it was easy writing all the other songs. I went through quite a few bits and pieces, but we got there, definitely got there with it. So.
And with it being a lockdown project, you pretty much played all the instruments yourself as well. I mean, did you enjoy that, the variety of it all?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I did get. I had the one track that had appeared on the Dave Lambert and Chaz Cronk album, and Dave Lambert had originally played guitar on that, so obviously I kept that. So he plays guitar on the one song, and towards the end of the recording of it, just when we were getting together to rehearse for that festival, I was saying with Strawbs, I was saying about last September, October. Dave Bainbridge, who's that Strawbs keyboard player, but is also just an outrageous guitarist as well. He came to stay with us while we were rehearsing for those shows, and so he put a guitar solo on the end of another track called "Slipping Downstream," which is a bit astounding. But I think the thing about doing the whole thing myself, and circumstances, almost making sure I had to sort of do it myself, meant that I was able to really get some of my production thoughts across as well. You know, when you work with a band, inevitably, of course, there's a collaborative nature to the whole thing, which is fine. You know, that's the way it works. That's fine. But it was interesting to be able to explore some of my own processes and take them to the finished state. You know, so sound wise and production wise, I was quite pleased with the way it worked out in the end. So.
And what's your favourite track on the album then, for you personally?
Oh, now you got me there. Well, I guess because it's the one that started off, Liberties. Liberties probably a good. Yeah, I would have to say that probably. But being a Libran, I could take a long while making my mind up about that. So it's best I say that. I guess as the song that kicked the whole thing off. Yeah.
As a fellow Libran, I know exactly what you mean. Now, the album, it's out now, and it's available in many different forms. You can stream it on Spotify and things like that, but you can also buy it physically. CD, vinyl, there's special sets as well, where there's lost photos and lyric sheets and all these little things like that, all really special things. I mean, were you involved in the collation of these different things for these special sets?
Well, pretty much it's record company's idea. So, and as the artwork was, so I've let them do their thing there, really. But the vinyl is available, I think, this week. Yeah, I mean, it's been available for pre-order for a bit, but I think physically that it should be arriving. It's a few weeks late, the vinyl, because of production hold-ups in America there. But the CD's out there, as you say, and you know, can be ordered direct from Renaissance Records in the States, or I do know of eBay sellers or private sellers over here that's selling it. There's no actual official UK distribution for Renaissance Records, unfortunately, but there are ways of getting it. Some friends of mine have got it off eBay, and saying it's all worked out, this all comes through. So
thank you so much for joining me, Chaz. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I wish you best of luck with the album and moving forward with hopefully some new Strawbs music as well.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I reckon that will happen probably next year, early next year. I reckon you'll see something there, hopefully.